Open any children's book that teaches the music alphabet. Run the song through your mind. A BCD right the way through to Z. 26 letters. The full English alphabet. The complete set of symbols that every English-speaking child memorizes before they can even tie their laces. 26. Fixed. Settled, beyond change. As essential to reading as numbers are to maths. The alphabet isn't something that gets revised. It isn't something that shifts with the times. It's the bedrock, the foundation, the thing underneath everything. Except it was 27. Within the memory of someone your great-grandparents might have known, the English alphabet contained a 27th letter. It stood at the end, after Z, in the place of honor that the final letter of any sequence holds. Children recited it during their lessons. It appeared in dictionaries. It was printed in school books and carved over the doorways of institutions and written into the documents that structured everyday life. And then it vanished. Not through any grand announcement, not by way of a legal act or an academic conference or a public debate. It simply stopped being taught, stopped being printed, stopped being included. And within a single generation, nobody remembered it had ever been there. That letter was the ampersand. And I need you to look at that symbol. You know it. You use it. You see it on shop fronts and in brand names, and in the casual shorthand of texts. You know what it means. End. It means and. But you think of it as a symbol, a piece of punctuation, a typographic shortcut. You do not think of it as a letter. And that's exactly the point. Because it was a letter, the 27th letter of the English alphabet. And the story of how it was removed, and why, and what that removal reveals about who controls the very architecture of language. That story has been buried so deeply that most people react with disbelief when they hear it. Go and check, seriously. Pull up alphabet charts from the early 1800s. Pull up classroom primers from the 1820s and 1830s. Pull up Noah Webster's early dictionaries. The ampersand sits at the end of the alphabet, after Z, listed as a letter, taught as a letter, treated as a letter by every institution responsible for passing on literacy in the English-speaking world. Children reciting the alphabet would reach Z and keep going. Ampersand. The phrase means, and by itself means and. Say it fast. Ampersand. Faster. Ampersand. Ampersand. The name of the symbol is a linguistic fossil from the recitation that school children performed when it was still the 27th letter. The name itself is the ghost of its own deletion. A scar in the language, marking where something was cut away. This raises a simple but crucial question. Why was it removed? The official explanation, as far as one exists, is vague. The ampersand was gradually dropped from the alphabet in the mid-1800s because it wasn't really a letter. It was a ligature, a combination of the letters E and T, from the Latin word meaning and. It didn't represent a unique sound the way other letters did. It was a symbol for a word, not a sound. And therefore, it didn't belong in an alphabet meant to represent phonetic building blocks. It was reclassified, moved from the alphabet to the category of typographic symbols. Not deleted, just reorganized. And that explanation sounds reasonable. It sounds like the kind of neat editorial decision grammarians and lexicographers make when standardizing a language in the ordinary course of things. Except the deeper I looked, the more the neatness of that explanation started to fray. Because the ampersand wasn't the only letter removed from the English alphabet. It wasn't even the most recent. The history of the English alphabet is a history of deletion, of letters that existed, that were used, that carried specific sounds and specific meanings, and that were removed at particular moments in history by particular authorities for reasons never fully explained to the people who lost them. Pull up the Old English alphabet. Count the letters. You'll find several that don't appear in the modern alphabet. Thorn, which looked like this, it represented the sound. Eth, which looked like this, it also represented a th sound, slightly different from thorn. Win, which looked like this, it represented the W sound before the letter W existed. Ash, which looked like this, it represented a vowel sound between A and E. Ithel, which looked like this, it represented another vowel sound. Each of these letters carried a specific phonetic value. Each represented a sound that English actually produces. Each was a working part of a writing system refined over centuries to accurately represent the sounds of spoken English. And each was deleted. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. Thorn was gradually replaced by the digraph, th, starting in the Middle English period. The replacement was sped up by the arrival of the printing press, which was developed in Germany using typefaces that didn't include thorn. Printers substituted the letter Y, which in certain typefaces resembled thorn, creating the Y that modern people misread as an archaic pronunciation, when it was always pronounced. The old shop was never said with a Y sound. It was said, the old shop. The Y was a printer's makeshift for a letter that had been cut from the typeface. The silence was deafening when I began tracing who made these decisions. Because removing letters from an alphabet isn't a natural process. Languages evolve naturally. Sounds shift. Pronunciations change. But the alphabet is an artificial system, a technology, a design tool for representing language in written form. And tools don't redesign themselves. Someone decides. Someone with authority over the printing presses, over the school curricula, over the dictionaries and grammars that define what is and isn't correct. Someone with institutional power chooses which letters stay and which go, as if following instructions they didn't fully grasp. The deeper I went into the history of alphabet standardization, the more I found that the critical period of deletion clustered in the same era that keeps appearing in every investigation I pursue, the period roughly between 1400 and 1800, the era of the printing press, the era of institutional standardization, the era when language, which had been a living, locally varied, orally transmitted phenomenon for millennia, was captured, fixed, and controlled by the technology of mass reproduction. Before the printing press, English was written in dozens of regional variations, each with its own spelling conventions, its own letter shapes, its own relationship between written symbol and spoken sound. A writer in Yorkshire and a writer in London might use different letters for the same sound. The system was organic, distributed, local, and it was accurate in the sense that each regional writing system reflected the actual speech patterns of its community. The printing press destroyed this diversity, not through natural selection but through economic pressure. Printers needed standardized typefaces. Standardized typefaces required a fixed alphabet. A fixed alphabet required decisions about which letters to keep and which to discard. And those decisions were made not by linguists, studying the sounds of language, but by printers optimizing the efficiency of their equipment. Letters that were hard to cast in metal were removed. Letters that didn't exist in the continental typefaces English printers, imported from Germany and the Netherlands, were abandoned. The alphabet was shaped not by the needs of the language, but by the limits and economics of printing technology. This raises a question I can't stop coming back to. What was lost when those letters were removed? Not just typographic characters, but sounds, distinctions, the ability to write down the actual phonetic texture of spoken English. Thorn and eth weren't interchangeable. They represented slightly different versions of the sound, a distinction that existed in speech and that the old alphabet could capture, but that the modern alphabet with its single th digraph cannot. The removal of thorn and eth didn't change how people spoke. It changed how accurately speech could be written. It lowered the resolution of the writing system. It made the alphabet a fuzzier, less precise representation of the language it was meant to serve. And here's where the thread connects to the ampersand. Because the ampersand's removal follows the same pattern. A character that had been part of the system for centuries was dropped during the period of institutional standardization. The justification was technical. It wasn't really a letter, but the effect was cultural. The ampersand's presence at the end of the alphabet wasn't just a quirk. It was a statement. It said that the connective, the joining word, the symbol of and, of addition, of bringing things together, was fundamental enough to the language to be included in its most basic architecture. Its removal said the opposite. The connection became secondary, optional. A symbol rather than a letter, a convenience rather than a foundation. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision across many languages, because English isn't the only alphabet that was pruned during that era of institutional standardization. French, German, Spanish, Italian, virtually every European language underwent alphabet reform between the 1400s and the 1800s. Letters were removed. Diacritical marks were standardized or eliminated. Regional variations were crushed into national standards. The printing press and the institutional authority that controlled it reshaped every alphabet it touched. And it touched every alphabet in Europe. And here's the detail that made me put down my research and stare at the ceiling. The standardization always moved in the same direction. Toward fewer letters, toward less precision, toward a reduced capacity to represent the actual complexity of spoken language. Every reform simplified, every reform removed. Every reform made the writing system less able to capture the nuances of the language it was supposed to represent. Go compare Old English to modern English in terms of phonetic representation. Old English had dedicated letters for sounds that modern English represents with digraphs or ambiguous spellings. The th, in, the, and the th, in, thin are different sounds. Old English had different letters for each. Modern English uses the same two characters for both and relies on the reader to figure out from context which sound is meant. The writing system became less precise. The reader was given more work. The language on the page moved further from the language in the mouth. The official explanation collapses here because the standard story tells us that alphabet simplification was progress. Efficiency, modernization. The removal of redundancies and archaisms that cluttered the writing system without adding value. But that story assumes that the people making the decisions were optimizing for the benefit of the language's users. And the deeper I went, the more I found they were optimizing for the benefit of the language's controllers. The printers, the publishers, the institutions that produced the books, and the curricula and the dictionaries that defined correct English. Fewer letters means fewer typefaces to cast. Fewer typefaces means lower production costs. Lower production costs means higher profit margins. The economic incentive to simplify the alphabet was enormous, and it aligned perfectly with the institutional incentive to standardize the language into a form that could be centrally managed. A language with regional variations and local letter forms is a language that resists central control. A language with a fixed, simplified, nationally standardized alphabet is a language that can be taught from a single textbook, printed by a single press, and governed by a single authority. The 27th letter didn't die of natural causes. It was removed by a system that was optimizing for control and efficiency, not for the expressive power of the language. And it was removed so cleanly, so completely, that within a generation, the people who used the language every day didn't know they were missing anything. I'm not telling you the ampersand's removal was a conspiracy. I'm telling you that the alphabet you learned as a child is not the alphabet that existed 200 years ago. That letters were removed during a specific historical period by specific institutional authorities for reasons that served those authorities' interests more than the interests of the people using the language. That the writing system you use every day is a simplified, reduced, less capable version of a system that once had more letters, more precision, more ability to represent the actual sounds and connections of human speech. I'm asking what else was simplified. What other features of the language were pruned to fit the economics of the printing press and the politics of institutional standardization? What sounds were collapsed into ambiguity? What distinctions were erased? What capacity for expression was removed from the written language during those centuries when the written language was being captured and controlled by technologies and institutions that valued efficiency over expressiveness? I'm asking why you were taught 26 letters and told it was the whole alphabet. Go sing the song again. A BC all the way through to Z. Listen to where it ends. Feel the completeness of it. The certainty that nothing is missing. That 26 is all there ever was. Now say, and hear the ghost of the 27th letter in the name of the symbol you still use every day, but no longer recognize for what it was. Handed an alphabet and told it was complete. What else have we been handed and never thought to question?